My brother framed me for kidnapping, planting evidence in my car and giving false testimony. I'm sorry it had to be you, he whispered at my sentencing. 15 years later, I walked out of prison to find him married to my wife, living in my house, raising my kids. I didn't confront him. I didn't announce my return. I just quietly gathered evidence, surveillance footage he didn't know existed, recorded phone calls, witness statements from people who finally decided to talk. 6 months later, police showed up at his door. The kids watched their father get arrested on live TV. Now he's calling from his cell. Please, I was young and stupid. The kids need their dad. My name is Calvin, and this is the story of how my brother destroyed my life, and how I rebuilt it just to destroy his. Back in 2009, I had everything a man could want. A beautiful wife named Renee, twin daughters who were 8 years old, Nora and Ivy, and a construction business that was finally taking off after years of struggle. My younger brother Ellis had always been the family disappointment. While I worked 60-hour weeks to build something meaningful, he bounced between dead-end jobs and get-rich-quick schemes that inevitably collapsed. What I didn't know was that Ellis had been stealing from my business for months. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here, 1,000 there, but it escalated when he got involved with some serious people who didn't appreciate late payments on gambling debts. The kidnapping happened on a Tuesday in November 2009. 8-year-old Aiden Whitlow disappeared from his school playground. The whole city was in an uproar. Search parties, Amber Alerts, the works. 3 days later, they found him tied up in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, traumatized but physically unharmed. That's when my world ended. The police showed up at my house with a search warrant. They found zip ties identical to the ones used on Aiden in my work truck. They found a child's sock, which would later be confirmed as Aiden's, stuffed behind my spare tire. Most damning of all, they had a witness. My own brother. Ellis sat in that witness box, tears streaming down his face, and told the court that he'd seen me acting strangely in the days leading up to the kidnapping. He said I'd been asking weird questions about Aiden's family. The Whitlows were wealthy, prominent in our small town. He testified that he'd confronted me about it, and I'd gotten angry and defensive. I should have said something sooner, Ellis sobbed. But he's my brother. I thought. I hoped I was wrong. The performance was Oscar-worthy. Even I almost believed him. My lawyer tried to poke holes in the case. Where was the ransom demand? Why would I kidnap a child just to leave him in a warehouse? But the physical evidence was overwhelming, and Ellis's testimony sealed my fate. 15 years, the judge said. For kidnapping and child endangerment. As they led me away in shackles, Ellis approached me near the courthouse exit. The guards were distracted, arguing about paperwork. I'm sorry it had to be you, he whispered, his face a mask of false anguish. But I couldn't let them find out what I really did. You understand, right? You always said family comes first. I stared at him, the full scope of his betrayal finally hitting me. You did this. You kidnapped that boy. I needed the money, Calvin. Those people were going to kill me. I never meant for it to go this far. I was just supposed to scare them, make them think twice about coming after me. But when the kid saw my face, he shrugged. I panicked. I needed someone to take the fall. And you chose me. You're strong. You can handle prison. Me? I'd never survive. He glanced around nervously. Take care of Renee and the girls for me, will you? Oh wait, I guess I'll be doing that now. Prison is a different world, one that strips away everything you thought you knew about yourself. The first year was the hardest. I was angry, desperate, clinging to the hope that somehow the truth would come out. I wrote letters to lawyers, journalists, anyone who would listen. I filed appeals that went nowhere. My wife visited for the first 6 months. She'd bring the girls, and we'd sit in the visiting room pretending everything was normal. But I could see it in her eyes, the doubt, the fear, the shame. She wanted to believe me, but the evidence was so overwhelming. Maybe you should just confess, she said during one visit. Show remorse. They might reduce your sentence. I can't confess to something I didn't do, Renee. You know me. You know I would never hurt a child. But did she? After 15 years of marriage, her husband had supposedly kidnapped an 8-year-old boy. What did she really know about anyone? The visits became less frequent. 6 months became 3 months became twice a year became nothing. The divorce papers arrived in year 3. I signed them without contest. What was the point in fighting? From my cell, I watched my old life crumble while my brother swooped in to pick up the pieces. I learned to survive inside. Found my place in the ecosystem, made the right alliances, kept my head down. But I never stopped thinking about Ellis. Never stopped planning. Year 7 brought an unexpected gift. A new cellmate named Hank, a former private investigator doing time for tax evasion. Hank was smart, methodical, and bored out of his mind. When I told him my story, he became obsessed with proving my innocence. Your brother was clever, Hank said, poring over the case files I'd managed to obtain. But he made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Hank helped me map out the timeline, identify inconsistencies in Ellis's testimony, and track down leads that my original lawyer had missed. We discovered that Ellis had been at the warehouse district the week before the kidnapping, supposedly looking at used equipment for a business venture that never materialized. More importantly, Hank taught me about patience. About playing the long game. Revenge isn't about getting even, he said. It's about getting ahead. Your brother thinks he won. Let him keep thinking that. But you? You're going to be ready. I spent the next 8 years becoming someone new. I earned my GED, then a bachelor's degree in business management through correspondence courses. I learned about surveillance technology, legal procedures, financial forensics. I read every book I could get my hands on about investigation techniques. Most importantly, I learned to wait. I followed Ellis's life through carefully maintained connections on the outside. My cousin Marcus had never believed I was guilty and visited me monthly, keeping me updated on family affairs. A former employee, Tony, felt terrible about testifying for the prosecution after being pressured by police, and he made sure I knew what was happening with my old business. I also had Hank's connections, other former investigators doing time who had contacts still working cases. Slowly, I pieced together the picture of my brother's new life. He'd married Renee 2 years after my conviction. Moved into my house, the one I'd built with my own hands. Adopted my daughters. Took over my business, running it into the ground within 5 years before selling it off piece by piece. But Ellis was still Ellis. He couldn't help himself. Through my sources, I learned about his gambling problem, his drinking, his pattern of small-time scams and cons. He'd never changed, he'd just gotten better at hiding it. And that's when I realized the truth. Ellis hadn't kidnapped Aiden Whitlow for money. Through Hank's investigation, we discovered that Ellis had been embezzling from a local contractors union fund. The kidnapping happened right when an audit was scheduled. Ellis created the chaos to buy time and shift blame. He'd been planning to frame me for weeks, planting evidence gradually. The kidnapping was never about ransom, it was about creating a scandal big enough to divert attention from the missing union funds and destroy the one person who might have uncovered his theft. I started making calls from prison, carefully documenting everything, building a case. Not for my innocence, that ship had sailed. For his guilt. They released me on a Tuesday, just like the day that ruined my life. 15 years, 2 months, and 16 days after I'd walked into that courthouse a free man. It was March 2025. I'd prepared for this moment for years. I had a small apartment rented through my cousin Marcus, a car waiting, and enough money from my prison job combined with compensation from a class action lawsuit for prison labor violations to last several months. Most importantly, I had a plan. I didn't contact anyone. Didn't announce my return. I simply disappeared into the city and began to watch. Ellis was 47 now, prematurely gray and soft around the middle. He'd kept my house but let it fall into disrepair. The lawn was overgrown, the paint was peeling, and the garage where I'd once kept my tools was full of junk. Renee looked tired. The vibrant woman I'd married had been replaced by someone who moved through life like she was sleepwalking. She worked at a medical office now, coming home each evening to cook dinner for a man who barely acknowledged her presence. My daughters, his daughters now, were 24. Nora was finishing her master's degree, Ivy was working as a nurse. They had been old enough when I was convicted to remember me, but Ellis had spent years poisoning them against me, telling them I was dangerous, that I'd abandoned them. I was just the monster who tried to hurt a child, a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong people. It broke my heart, but it also fueled my resolve. I'd learned patience in prison, but now I had to learn surveillance. I rented a small office across town and began building my case systematically. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Aiden Whitlow, now 24, had struggled with addiction and trauma since his kidnapping. He'd been in and out of rehab, and his family had gradually stopped talking about what happened. But Aiden remembered things, details that had never made it into the police report because his family's lawyers had advised against having him testify, fearing it would traumatize him further. I found him at a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, looking hollow-eyed and defeated. After the meeting, I approached him carefully. "I'm Calvin," I said. "I was convicted of kidnapping you." He flinched, but didn't run. "I know this is going to sound crazy," I continued, "but I didn't do it. And I think I can prove who did." Over the next several weeks, I met with Aiden regularly. Slowly, carefully, I helped him remember details that had been buried by trauma and therapy. The kidnapper's voice, higher than mine, with a slight accent that Ellis had developed after spending a summer in Tennessee. The smell of cigarettes. I'd never smoked, but Ellis had been a pack-a-day smoker until his 30s. Small scars on the kidnapper's hands that matched ones Ellis had gotten in a childhood accident. Most importantly, Aiden remembered something he'd never told anyone. The kidnapper had called him by the wrong name twice, calling him Wesley instead of Aiden. Wesley was the name of Ellis's childhood imaginary friend. Armed with Aiden's recovered memories, I began building a comprehensive case. I hired a private investigator, a former cop named Delia Monroe who specialized in cold cases. I paid her with money from the prison labor lawsuit settlement and loans from Marcus, who'd been saving money for my release for years. Delia was thorough. She tracked down surveillance footage from a security company that had gone out of business but sold their archived data to a digital storage firm. The images showed Ellis's truck in the warehouse district multiple times. She found financial records from the union audit that had been sealed but were accessible through a Freedom of Information Act request after a recent court ruling. She even located the storage unit where Ellis had kept evidence he planned to plant, including Aiden's sock. The rental record showed Ellis had paid cash and used a fake name, but the security cameras had captured his license plate. Most damning of all, she found Ellis's former girlfriend, a woman named Greta Palmer who'd been too scared to come forward during the original investigation. "He told me he was going to do something that would solve all his problems," Greta said, her voice shaking as Delia recorded our conversation. "He said his family would never forgive him, but they'd understand eventually. He said sometimes good people have to pay for bad people's mistakes." Greta had been afraid to speak up before because Ellis had threatened her family. But 15 years had given her perspective, and when Delia tracked her down in Arizona where she'd moved to escape her past, she was ready to tell the truth. She'd kept a recording of Ellis's confession on an old cassette tape, insurance she'd hoped she'd never need to use. I could have gone to the police immediately. Could have demanded a new investigation, fought for exoneration. But that would have been the old Calvin talking, the one who believed in justice and fair play. Prison had taught me that justice is something you make for yourself. Instead, I began a different kind of campaign. I started leaving evidence where Ellis would find it, photos of his truck near the warehouse, copies of his gambling debts, recordings of Greta's testimony. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make him panic. Just enough to make him paranoid. I wanted him to know that someone was watching. Someone who knew the truth. The paranoia began slowly. Ellis started drinking more, staying out later, snapping at Renee and the girls. He installed new locks on the house, upgraded the security system, and began checking over his shoulder everywhere he went. Then I started the phone calls. "You can't hide forever," I'd whisper when he answered. "Truth has a way of surfacing." "Who is this?" he'd demand, but I'd already hung up. I called from different numbers, at different times. Sometimes I said nothing at all, just let him hear the silence and know that someone was there. Someone who knew. 6 months after my release, I finally made my move. I gathered enough evidence to destroy Ellis 10 times over, but I wanted him to know it was coming from me. I wanted him to understand exactly what he'd cost me, and what it was going to cost him. I waited until Renee and the girls were out. Nora was visiting her boyfriend, Ivy was working a night shift at the hospital, and Renee was at her book club. Ellis was alone in my house, drinking my whiskey in my living room. I didn't need to break in. During one of his drunken paranoid episodes, Ellis had hidden a spare key in the same place I'd always kept one, under the fake rock by the back steps. Old habits die hard. Ellis was passed out in my recliner when I found him, an empty bottle at his feet. He looked pathetic, a middle-aged man who'd built his life on lies and was finally starting to crumble under the weight of them. I sat down across from him and waited. He woke up an hour later, groggy and disoriented. When he saw me, his face went white. Calvin? But you're supposed to be in prison? I smiled. I got out 6 months ago. Surprised you didn't know. I thought you might have been keeping track. He tried to stand, swayed, and sat back down hard. What do you want? I want you to understand something, Ellis. For 15 years, I've been planning this moment. Every single day, I thought about what I would do when I got out. Do you know what I decided? He shook his head, terror creeping into his eyes. I decided that I wasn't going to kill you. I wasn't going to hurt you physically. I was going to do something much worse. I leaned forward. I was going to make you live with the consequences of your choices. I pulled out a thick folder and set it on the coffee table between us. Surveillance footage of your truck at the warehouse. Financial records from the union audit. The storage unit rental agreement with your license plate on camera. A cassette tape of you confessing everything to Greta Palmer. And most importantly, a statement from Aiden Whitlow about what he really remembers from that day, including you calling him Wesley. Ellis's hand shook as he reached for the folder. Calvin, please. You don't understand. I was in trouble. Real trouble. Those people were going to kill you? I finished. So you decided to frame me instead. Your own brother. The man who'd spent his whole life looking out for you. I never meant for it to go that far. I just needed to buy some time, create a distraction. I thought the charges wouldn't stick. I thought your lawyer would get you off. But they did stick. And you let them. I stood up. You sat in that courtroom and lied under oath. You sent me to prison for 15 years for something you did. I'm sorry. Ellis was crying now, tears and snot running down his face. I'm so sorry, Calvin. I was young and scared and stupid. But look what I did with the time you gave me. I took care of Renee. I raised your girls. I kept your family together. My family. The words came out like acid. You stole my family. I protected them. Do you think they would have been better off with their father in prison? Do you think Renee would have been happier struggling as a single mother? I stared at him for a long moment. You actually believe that, don't you? You've convinced yourself that you're the hero of this story. I did what I had to do to survive. No, Ellis. You did what you always do. You took the easy way out and let someone else pay the price. I picked up the folder. But that's over now. I walked out of that house, my house, and drove straight to the police station. I handed over everything I'd gathered to Detective Langston, a seasoned investigator who'd been bothered by inconsistencies in my original case for years. She'd actually requested the file several times, but her superiors had always told her the case was closed. This changes everything, she said, flipping through the evidence. I always wondered why your brother's testimony felt so rehearsed. And the physical evidence, it was almost too convenient. Because I wanted to be sure. And because I wanted him to know it was coming. The arrest happened 3 days later. I wasn't watching from across the street, I was at the police station, giving my final statement when Detective Langston got the call that the arrest was complete. Renee later told me that the girls had come home early and witnessed everything. Ellis had tried to run when he saw the police cars, but he was too drunk and out of shape to get far. The local news picked up the story within hours. Man arrested for 15-year-old kidnapping, the headline read. Brother served time for crime he didn't commit. They interviewed me on the evening news. I kept it simple, I spent 15 years paying for my brother's crime. Now it's his turn to pay for his own. Ellis's trial was swift and decisive. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he took a plea deal, 25 years without parole. The judge was not impressed by his attempts to paint himself as a victim of circumstances. You didn't just commit kidnapping, Judge Colburn said during sentencing. You committed perjury. You destroyed your brother's life and family. You perverted the course of justice. 25 years is actually quite generous, considering the scope of your crimes. Aiden Whitlow was there for the sentencing. He'd gotten clean and started speaking at trauma recovery groups. When Ellis was led away, Aiden turned to me. Thank you, he said simply. For not giving up. For finding the truth. I was officially exonerated 3 months later, after a thorough review by the state's Conviction Integrity Unit. The legal process was lengthy but necessary. They had to verify every piece of evidence, re-interview witnesses, and ensure that the new case against Ellis was airtight. The state offered me compensation, a significant sum for wrongful imprisonment. I donated half to organizations that help wrongfully convicted people and used the rest to start over. Ellis called me exactly once from prison, about 6 months after his conviction. It was unexpected. I'd given my number to his lawyer for legal purposes, never thinking Ellis would use it. Please, Calvin. I'm sorry. I was young and stupid. The kids need their dad. I listened to his familiar voice, the same voice that had lied under oath and destroyed my life. But instead of anger, I felt only emptiness. You made your choice 15 years ago, Ellis. Now live with it. I hung up and had my number changed. There would be no more conversations. These days, I run a small consulting firm that helps wrongfully convicted people navigate the system. I work with lawyers, private investigators, and advocacy groups to find the truth in cases where justice went wrong. It's meaningful work, but it's also a reminder of how fragile everything really is. How quickly a life can be destroyed by lies and circumstance. How the system we trust to protect us can become the weapon used against us. I've reconnected with Nora and Ivy, slowly and carefully. They're adults now, smart and strong and independent. The process wasn't easy. They had to work through years of lies Ellis had told them about me, painting me as violent and dangerous. Family therapy helped. They learned that the father who raised them had been living a lie, and that their real father had been paying for crimes he didn't commit. But we're building something new. Not trying to recapture what was lost, but creating something different. Something honest. Nora visits twice a month, and we text regularly. Ivy is more cautious, but she's slowly opening up. It's not the relationship we would have had if I'd been there for their teenage years, but it's real. Renee and I have coffee occasionally. We're cordial, even friendly, but we're different people than we were 20 years ago. Too much has happened, too much trust has been broken. She's seeing someone new, a good man who teaches high school history and coaches Little League. I'm genuinely happy for her. As for Ellis, he has 19 years left on his sentence. If he serves his full time, he'll be 66 when he gets out. By then, I'll be in my 60s, Nora and Ivy will be in their 40s, and the world will have moved on without him. Sometimes I wonder if I'll feel differently when that day comes. If I'll have found forgiveness by then. If the anger will have faded into something more manageable. But probably not. Some betrayals are too deep, some wounds too fundamental to heal completely. Ellis didn't just steal 15 years of my life, he stole my children's childhood, my wife's peace of mind, and a little boy's innocence. Those aren't the kinds of things you forgive. Those are the kinds of things you make people pay for. The dish is served. And it's exactly as cold as it needs to be.